I'm Bruce Workington, and I want to talk to you about your farm's financial health. One of the ways you can assess your financial health is through ratios. These include liquidity, capital structure, and profitability. So in this first video, I'm going to be talking about analyzing your farm's health using liquidity ratios. When assessing a farm's liquidity, the first ratio we're going to look at is the current ratio. This ratio compares a farm's current assets to its current liabilities and is used as a test of financial health since it shows a farm's ability to pay off its short-term debts. Now, what are classified as current assets for a farm? The main categories are cash, receivables, prepaids, and inventory, while the current liabilities of a farm would be its operating line, payables, taxes, and current portion of long-term debt. To calculate the current ratio, you take the current assets and you divide it by the current liabilities. Now, what does the current ratio mean? A ratio of 2 to 1 means for every dollar of liabilities, the farm has $2 of current assets. While a high ratio means there's ability to pay short-term debt, too high a ratio means the farm is not employing its working capital efficiently. Alternatively, too low a current ratio means that a farm does not have enough current assets to cover its short-term liabilities and could run into issues with extending payables. Extending payables results in paying high interest and penalties. Over the long term, if a farm continues to extend payables, it may not be able to obtain credit and eventually may become insolvent. What is an ideal current ratio? In general, a 1.5 to 1 current ratio is a good rule of thumb, but it depends on your farm. Take a look at your own 5-year trend and what you are comfortable with. There are times when you may want a higher ratio, like when you're putting aside capital for future growth, or a lower ratio when your farm has deployed capital at an optimal level. The important takeaway is to ensure you have a conversation with your advisors on what your target current ratio should be and how to get there. The next ratio to assess your farm's liquidity is the working capital to next year's expenses. Another way to look at liquidity for a farm is to compare its working capital, current assets less current liabilities, to its estimated next year's expenses. In other words, how much of next year's expenses does the farm have on hand at the end of the previous year? Having all of next year's expenses on hand in the form of working capital would generally give an indication of a healthy farm. However, what happens if the farm is growing? Then having more working capital would be appropriate to fund increased expenses. On the other hand, if the farm is stable or decreasing, then having lower level of working capital would be more efficient. Having a discussion with your advisor on where your farm is at in its growth cycle will allow you to target an optimal amount of working capital. The cash flow ratio is the final ratio we're going to talk about in assessing liquidity of your farm. This is the ability for your farm to service debt and is calculated as net earnings plus interest expense, taxes, and amortization divided by required annual debt repayments. A healthy cash flow ratio might be as low as 1.1 to 1, but could be as high as 3 to 1. It depends on the risk tolerance of your farm and your bank. It's important to monitor this ratio closely, as a healthy relationship between a farm and its bank is critical for a farm's profitability and growth. Liquidity ratios of current ratio, working capital to next year's expenses, and cash flow ratio are critical to calculate and analyze regularly. Healthy farm liquidity ratios may depend on what stage your farm is in, whether it's in growth, maturity, or decline, and also your own risk tolerance. Make sure to talk to your advisor to ensure you are targeting the right level for your farm.